Frank Botts was a United States Marine and a veteran of World War II. During his time with the Marines, he was also stationed for a time at Camp Pendleton in Southern California. After completing his military service, Frank and his family remained in California, taking up residence in San Diego. Frank and his wife Elaine had 3 children, a son and 2 daughters. Frank would take his son John fishing on a barge that was kept off of the coast near Oceanside. Frank and Elaine opened a small store, Botts Gift Shop, in the College Grove Shopping Center. On the afternoon of Saturday, April 2, 1977, a customer came into Botts Gift Shop, but no one was there to greet them. When they walked to the back of the store, they discovered Frank's body in the store's office. He had been stabbed to death in what would later be determined to be a robbery. He was 61 years old at the time he was killed. It would take 46 years and 5 labs in 2 states to finally solve Frank's murder. A renewed investigation into the case began in 2021. In the summer of that year, a match was found to a set of fingerprints collected from the glass counter at the gift shop when the scene was processed after Frank's murder. The technology required to adequately process these years-old fingerprint lifts had only been developed within the previous decade. Still, investigators hoped to find more corroborating evidence. They therefore used multiple labs to look for and process DNA evidence. A hat, which investigators describe as distinctive, had been found in the office along with Frank's body. It did not belong to him, and police believed his killer had lost it in the struggle that had ended with Frank's murder. One of the labs working with the investigators from the San Diego District Attorney's Office ultimately developed technology that allowed them to pull a DNA sample from the hat and match it to an individual whose DNA was on file. The DNA profile from the hat matched a DNA profile later extracted from scrapings taken from Frank's fingernails at his autopsy. The DNA profile belonged to the same individual, identified in 2021 as having left their fingerprints at the scene. In May of 2023, the San Diego District Attorney's Office identified the person responsible for the murder of Frank Botts as Norman Lamont Jones. Jones had been just 16 years old at the time of Frank's murder, but he was already 2 years into his criminal career. He would go on to have an extensive criminal record and be in and out of jail until 1991, when he was killed in an officer-involved shooting after a robbery at a store in the Fashion Valley shopping mall. Frank's son John has expressed relief both at finally having resolution to his father's case and at knowing that his father's killer had not been able to hurt anyone else after 1991. Joyce Casper was a generous, vivacious woman and the mother of 2 daughters and a son. She was loved by her children as well as their friends. Joyce owned a drugstore and soda fountain in the Vista Village Shopping Center in Boise, Idaho. Her children's friends from the local junior high school would come in to have lunch there, and Joyce would dote on all of them. Decades later, they would still remember the affection she showed towards them and the attention she gave to them. By 1987, Joyce's soda fountain no longer existed, but 65-year-old Joyce still owned a business at the location on Vista Avenue. She was now the owner and operator of Casper's Vista Hallmark and Gift Shop. On the morning of October 13, 1987, Joyce's vehicle was found near some railroad tracks at Day Drive and Robert Street, just a few blocks away from her store. Her body was inside of the car. While evidence suggested to police that Joyce had been murdered, they could not determine the exact cause of her death. They were able to determine that she had been sexually assaulted. Joyce was known to be a hard worker who often kept very late hours at her shop. The doors to the store were locked when police went there after the discovery of her body. They believed she had been abducted outside of her shop as she left in the early morning hours of the 13th. She was then sexually assaulted and killed, with her body being found a few hours later. Those who knew Joyce could not fathom that someone would want to hurt her, and those who lived and worked around her shop were shocked that such a violent crime could occur in their neighborhood. However, a recent incident had placed Joyce in danger. Just a few weeks before she was killed, Joyce called police to report that she had been attacked in her store. A young man, believed to be between the ages of 17 and 25, with slicked back black hair, had attacked Joyce in her store, but had run off when she fought back. Police were not able to identify this individual, but after Joyce was killed, they feared he may have been the person responsible for her murder. Joyce's purse had been emptied and one of her credit cards was missing. There were no security cameras in the area of her store or where Joyce and her car were ultimately found, and no witnesses could be located. Nearly 150 suspects were investigated in the following years. Semen was found at the scene, and eventually DNA was extracted from it. However, no match to it was ever located in criminal databases. The case was formally reopened in 2017 for the 30th anniversary of Joyce's murder. 2 investigators were assigned to work on her case full-time. They submitted the DNA from Joyce's crime scene to Parabon Nanolabs, who used it to generate an image of what the contributor of the DNA may have looked like. They found that the DNA profile was consistent with an individual who had dark hair and dark eyes and may have had Colombian or Puerto Rican ancestry. The image was released to the public, but no one called into police, reporting that they recognized the man in the image. In 2019, what would ultimately be a years-long effort to use genetic genealogy to solve the case began when a new detective assigned to the case started working with another company, Identifiers International. An extensive family tree was developed, and detectives looked into records of hundreds of individuals, trying to ascertain how they were related to Joyce's killer. They also collected DNA samples from numerous distant relatives of the killer, trying to figure out exactly where he would be situated within the family tree. Various social media sites and genealogical databases from all over the country were searched for leads. Investigators ultimately came into contact with a man who told them he had a half-brother who had lived in Idaho. They were able to get in contact with the half-brother's ex-wife in California. She had 2 sons with this man, but they were both homeless and difficult to contact. A detective did eventually find them in Los Angeles, and they provided samples of their DNA. Their DNA profiles confirmed that the DNA from the semen found at Joyce's crime scene belonged to their father. On July 7, 2023, the Boise Police Department announced that they had identified the individual they believed was responsible for Joyce Casper's murder as Frank A. Rodriguez. He had been just 17 years old at the time of Joyce's murder. Rodriguez could not be arrested or charged with the murder because he had taken his own life in 2007. Rodriguez's family cooperated with police, and his mother is still alive. Boise Police Detective Paul J. Ghosh likened informing her of the DNA match to a death notification, based on how devastated she was to learn of what her son had done. The Boise Police Department is currently looking into the possibility that Rodriguez may have been involved in other unsolved cases. "26-year-old David Malcom hailed from Connecticut and was living in Ithaca, New York, while enrolled at Cornell University. According to Nina Miller, one of his co-workers, the sheer gentleness of the man made him very special. He also had a wonderful sense of humor. He was the best of what young people can be. He was idealistic, sensitive, warm, very bright. David has also been described by others as being wise beyond his years and a good role model. David dedicated much of his time to helping others. He worked at a Red Cross emergency shelter and at a suicide prevention network. On February 11, 1987, David worked a 24-hour shift at the Red Cross shelter, which was located on West Court Street in Ithaca. On the morning of February 12th, his body was discovered in the shelter's office. He had been stabbed to death. Police initially suspected that David had been murdered by one of his co-workers and focused their investigation on this man for years. The case was investigated throughout 1987 and 1988, and then periodically up until 2010. The case was formally reopened in 2015 in hopes of using forensic science to solve it. The Ithaca Police Department worked with the New York State Police Troop C Major Crimes Unit, the New York State Police Forensic Identification Unit, the New York State Police Forensic Investigation Center, and the Tompkins County District Attorney's Office in the renewed effort. Following years of work, on May 26, 2023, the Ithaca Police Department announced that, based on DNA evidence and other investigative efforts, they had identified the individual they believed was responsible for the murder of David Malcom. However, they are choosing not to reveal his name to the public because he cannot be charged with the murder. He died in 2019. The exact source of the DNA that tied him to the murder was also not disclosed. According to investigators, David was killed by the boyfriend of a young woman who had come into the shelter where David worked for help. On February 11, 1987, a teenage girl from the town of Newfield came to the shelter following an altercation with her boyfriend, looking for assistance in being relocated somewhere away from him. Investigators believe that the deceased suspect came into the shelter looking for the young girl, and David refused to reveal where she was. According to the press release from the Ithaca Police, Mr. Malcolm's heroic actions for not disclosing the whereabouts of the young teen sadly cost him his life. Investigators from the Ithaca Police Department, Tompkins County District Attorney Matthew Van Houten, and Deputy Chief Vincent Monticello all met with David's family prior to the announcement that the case had been solved. They apologized for the fact that the case took 36 years to solve, attributing the family's long wait for answers to limited resources and the necessary technology being unavailable to them in 1987.